Welcome back to the Lensless Photography Podcast. I am your host, Oliver Winegar. In this episode, Andy, Metcalf, and I will be discussing whether weight or quality of photo gear is more important. Roll intro music. Andy, it's been a while. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing?
I am doing great.
Good to hear.
Yeah, everything's been good. What is new with you?
Not a ton. Finally shot a roll of film with the Hasselblad. Did not know how the meter works that I was using, and so I'm sure I've got it all nice and screwed up. But it's a film that expired nearly 18 years ago, so it probably doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it turns out when you get the scans back.
We should know next week.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be good. I just saw a bunch of 4x5 Ektar and a couple sheets of expired Ektachrome 100.
Yeah.
When I was in Zion's National Park, so hopefully that turns out. I'll have you take that to Alan's tomorrow and get that developed.
Yeah, we'll have a look. I'll tell you, it was interesting, like actually shooting with that Hasselblad. The reverse image when you're looking down through the viewfinder, that had me all sorts of screwed up. I had a horrible time trying to center in on what I was trying to focus on and what I was trying to shoot. It does take
some getting used to.
And then the other thing was holding it level. And I've always had a problem with that. Most of my pictures come out of camera not quite level. But the twisting motion that I had to use at waist level was just so confusing because it's backwards as well.
Yeah.
I'm tipping to the right, but the scene is tipping to the left. And man, that was difficult for me. I'm thinking it's going to be a tripod.
Yeah. Well,
that one.
Yeah, I mean,
or at least for a while.
How it is. So I'll have you check out my 4x5 camera too, because when you look through the ground glass, not only is it backwards, it's upside down.
Oh yes.
So it's just like you're going. Sometimes it can be good for compositions because you're going off of shapes and stuff like that too. But then sometimes I really struggle to see what I'm seeing clearly.
Yeah.
And so I try and set it up good and we'll see how the shots turn out. But,
yeah. We actually have a 4x5 set up at the store.
Oh, that's going out the window. I saw that. That's
pointed out the window. And what's funny is that one, when I want to move it to see what I'm seeing, I tend to look down the side of it and then move the camera to where it looks like it should go to. And then I have, that scene in there. And so it's easier to put into position, but mostly because I'm not looking into the camera, on that screen that's backwards and upside down.
Well, normally too is when you are looking through the scene. First of all, you'll point in the general direction, but then you have usually a big dark cloth over you and stuff like that. So it's not like you're very easily looking out of the cloth and looking back in. So sometimes you're kind of moving around while still your head's under this big cloth.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And that one at Allen's doesn't. It just has a little pop out thing.
Yeah, it's got a little pop out viewer, not the big cloth thing. Yeah, I will. It's going to take me a little bit of time to get used to that. But
it just takes some getting used to.
It'll be a lot of fun. I currently have a roll of Fuji Pro 400H film that is currently discontinued, but I've got a big stack of it at the store, so we're going to shoot off a couple of rolls of that and see what we like or don't like about it. And then we've got some Ektar, I think, is the other thing I'm going to shoot with it.
Yeah.
Because I like the Ektar.
I like Ektar. I've noticed with Ektar, if you underexpose it at all, it gets super saturated, but then all your blacks and stuff like that get super muddy and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
And so I always expose for the shadows, because the highlights, like you can still blow out your highlights, but they look a lot better than the shadows. So
Your highlights look better blown out than your blacks look muddy.
yes, and that's kind of what I realized with film is usually film, if anything, you need to expose for your shadows more, and digital you need to expose for your highlights more, because digital I feel like I can pull so much detail out of the shadows, but highlights I cannot always. Like I can still pull a decent amount, but not near as much as I can out of the shadows. And then film is like the opposite.
Yeah.
Except the dynamic range still isn't as much.
Right. But, yeah. So anyway, it'll be good. It'll be fun. I've kind of been in burnout mode for the last month or two, not wanting to shoot anything. I saw a really cool Facebook page. If I can find it again, I'll tell you where it is. But this guy takes his Star Wars toys and shoots these Star Wars scenes.
Oh, I've seen that.
They are so good.
They look like battle
absolutely
scenes,
phenomenal battle scenes. And there's one of just, it's a stormtrooper riding the like the little bike thing on Hoth. Is it Hoth with the snow?
Yeah.
I'm not a super Star Wars guy, but it's just this overhead shot of this stormtrooper riding that bike, and it is so cool looking. It is so cool. So I'll have to find his name, and I can tell you guys about it. You guys can go check it out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
but
cool.
It's kind of inspired me to try something, try and be creative. And I think the problem is that I'm burned out on family portraits and that sort of thing. I need to do something that's fun, not something that's work.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I do portraits all day at my job, pretty much, and a little commercial here and there. But lately, it's just been lots of portraits. So I understand that. Well, anyways, let's get into our topic. So I feel like we often talk about when you are ready to make a next purchase, or I'm ready to make a next purchase, the advantages and disadvantages of a lens based on the quality versus its weight. Some recent examples was when I was buying my 35 to 150. I was really debating it because it's heavy as crap, and I still think it's heavy as crap, but I love the lens because of the quality. Another example is when you're buying your 100 to 400, 100 to 500, you end up getting the 100 to 400 because of the weight, but then you end up selling that and getting the 100 to 500 for the quality.
Yes.
So I feel like this is a very common thing just with all type of gear, whether it's your camera, your lenses, just your whole setup, your tripod, or whatever. What's more important, the quality or having lightweight? So we kind of want to go into that for this episode. And we're going to start with lenses, kind of what we've already been talking about. So Andy, what's your experience on this?
Well, that's a tough one, but for the sake of maybe a little bit of history about me with a 50 millimeter lens. The first 50 millimeter lens that I had, let's talk digital, is the Canon Ef 50 millimeter f1.8, the plastic fantastic, the nifty 50.
Not the STM one.
Not the STM. And it was
the transformer sounding one.
Yes, the one that sounds like a transformer when it's focusing. It was nice because I had transitioned from film and to digital, and my film cameras have my old Olympus OMG and my Canon AE1 program both have 50 millimeter 1.8 lenses, and I was used to that. And so getting that lens on my digital camera was a nice familiar sort of thing, even though it was zoomed in further because I was on a crop sensor, and I quickly got used to that. But having the 1.8 again was kind of the big piece of that, having that aperture. But it really wasn't a great lens. I upgraded to the 50 1.4, and I had that lens for maybe a year, and I just never was really all that happy with it.
And that one's a little bit bigger than the 1.8. Probably twice the size, but the 1.8 is tiny though.
Yeah, the 1.8 is tiny. It weighs like, I don't know, 2 ounces or something.
Especially that one was very light.
Because it was all plastic. Like the mount and everything was plastic.
The glass was not glass, plastic. Just kidding. Well,
actually, in that case, in this case, those lenses are all glass. There's no plastic elements in those.
I hope
not. To the best of my knowledge, and from what I saw, they were all of the glass is glass. I bought the 1.4, and I was never really all that happy with it over the 1.8. Was it better? Yes. Was it great? No. So I saved up my money, and I bought the EF 50mm f1.2L, which is a big, heavy, beautiful 50mm lens, and it is very sharp at f2. But and that's been the standard, is that lenses aren't their sharpest wide open.
Yeah.
So I had that, and I had that lens for a few years, and I really liked it a lot. When Canon introduced their mirrorless line and the R camera, I thought, I'll give this a try. I bought the R. I had the 5D Mark IV at the time. 3 months later, I realized I hadn't touched my 5D Mark IV. I loved the R, and what I was really loving was the glass. The other thing I was really loving was that Canon introduced a SPIF program for employees of authorized resellers, and they were giving us back half of the money that we spent on these lenses. And so when they brought out the RF 50mm 1.2L for $2,300, I bought it, and then they gave me back $1,150. So I paid $1,150 for that lens. Well, I sold my EF 50mm 1.2L for almost that much money, and so it really didn't cost me anything.
Yeah.
150, maybe $200. I don't remember exactly. And I still have that lens. I love that lens. I love how sharp it is. I love how quick it is to focus. I love the bokeh. I don't love that it's kind of massive.
He has it on our desk right here, right now, and it is giant. And he has the 51.8 right next to it, the RF one, and it's tiny compared to it.
It is. It's almost kind of silly. It's twice the light for 3 or 4 times the size and weight, and 11 times the money.
Yes.
when you're talking retail. That being said, in my defense, maybe the 51.8 is a really new lens. It hasn't been out for a super long time. The only RF option that I had for a long time was that 1.2, and to be able to upgrade to that one for next to nothing.
Yeah.
By trading in my
you would have gotten it anyways, not key yourself.
Well, and that's true. I would have gotten it anyways, because I love what it does, and it definitely does a couple of things better than the new RF Nifty 50, the 100mm 1.8.
So explain this experiment that you did. So Andy came here and he pulled out a bunch of 8x12 photos of a scene that he took. One was with the 50mm 1.8 RF, and the other was with the 50mm 1.2 RF, and then over the entire f-stop range.
Yes, I shot both lenses. The 1.2 I shot at 1.2 because it would. I shot both of them at 1.8, and f4 and f8 and f16, and then the 51.8 I shot at f22 because it can, just so that I could see the difference between them. I printed all 10 of these photos in 8x12 size. It cost me a bunch of money, which is fine. And we've laid these out on the table right here as we're talking. And wouldn't you know it, it's almost impossible to see the difference between them. The exception to that is the 51.2 at 1.2 gives much better blur and towards the back of the scene, and therefore better bokeh than the 51.8 does, because the 51.8 isn't capable of 1.2. And so that, it's that physical limitation that made the difference. Aside from that, you have a really hard time.
I wouldn't be able to tell. We were looking at, and I was trying to notice differences in color and sharpness, and I really couldn't tell. Maybe if we would have zoomed in 100 or 200% and then been peeking at them like we are right now, we would be able to tell. And if it was like, the scientific ones where you see it like on YouTube where it's a bunch of numbers and like grids and things like that, where like they're peeping up and you can like see all the close lines together and you can actually see like the sharpness really well. Maybe if it was more like that, we would be able to tell. But
yeah, if it was a more scientific...
Yes, which this wasn't. This was more just like a real life use. You can't tell. You can't tell the color difference, and you can't tell the sharpness. At least I can't. I think you...
And I can't either. And, like Oliver's saying, if I had taken... And these are printed as 8x12. They are absolutely unedited except for white balance, because I had my white balance set wrong in my camera. So I adjusted the white balance on all of them exactly the same, and then I printed in Photoshop. I did the text on them and printed on them what they are. Aside from that, there was zero editing to the photos at all, and it's just a still life scene with a poinsettia plant, a couple of lenses, a couple of books, some random stuff in the picture, and you can see the table, you can see the chair rail and the wall behind it. It's just a little scene that I set up to do this. But, I got to say, and you guys have heard me on and on about my L series stuff and how great it is and how much I love it. But you set these two pictures of these two lenses at f8 or at f16 side by side, and they're the same.
Yes. And that's where this whole podcast episode comes into hand is it worth having that giant, crazy heavy, crazy expensive lens over that tiny, inexpensive, extremely sharp, small lens? And when it comes to it, if you're going off of sharpness and color, I think what we discovered from this, to be fair, we would need to do several different locations and scenes and stuff like that. But for the most part, from what we can see, no, it is not worth it unless you are considering the things besides sharpness. If you need that 1.2, like what he talked about, like what Andy talked about, if you need that really shallow depth of field, which is why people buy a 1.2 lens, is for that crazy shallow depth of field. And then you're also saying that the focusing was faster.
Yeah. So my experience with, of course, this was a still life scene that I set up on my dining room table. I had the camera on a tripod at the end of the table. And so the differences between the lenses are less apparent in this case than they are if I'm out on the street, doing street photography or the like. The advantages that I have with that 51.2 over the 1.8 are it focuses faster. It absolutely focuses faster. The 1.2 faster than the 1.8.
The 1.8 is still fast though.
It's fast. It's not like, derp-de-dur or anything like that. It's fast, but the 1.2 is on the verge of instant, which can be important when scenes change and, or you're trying to get that focus and get that shot before people notice that you're shooting, because you're wanting candid. You're not wanting people to turn and pose or duck away, or that sort of thing. There's definitely, that one stop advantage gives me twice the shutter speed, and the difference between 250th and 500th can make a difference in what you're shooting if your subject is moving. So are there advantages that 51.2 offers? Absolutely. Are those situations... Well, I was going to say, are those situations rare? I don't know. It depends on you and what you do and how you shoot.
Again, we discussed this kind of beforehand. If you're a wedding photographer, yes, it's probably worth it to have the 1.2, and especially like you're getting paid some decent money for it and stuff. You don't want to miss those moments or anything. But that's the thing. Your scenario that you're talking about, if you're a street photographer, that's the thing. If you're walking out in the street and doing like that photos, would you want to carry that 51.2? Is the quality that much better and the focusing that much better that you would want to carry that heavy lens out on the street with your neck strap or whatever in your hand compared to that 1.8 that's tiny and weighs next to nothing?
Well, and that's true. And I think what it comes down to is personal preference.
Yes.
For me, I have the weight of lenses for a very long time has not been an issue. Now I say that even though 4 episodes ago or so we were talking about why I bought the 100 to 400 over the 100 to 500. Of course, I didn't have the two side by side to compare. I hadn't shot either one of them really, and ultimately made the decision to move to the 100 to 500 because of the sharpness and the extra reach that I get. There's a significant difference in my experience between those two lenses, and that difference when you're shooting things that you're shooting, which is primarily, it's basically a wildlife lens, is what my experience. Most people are using that lens for is wildlife, and in that case, every millisecond can count and make a difference. And my issue with weight is not so much when I have it on my camera and carrying that around. It's when I'm loading my camera bag with lenses. I have the Canon's RF 85 1.2L. It is the most beautiful lens I have ever seen. It is stunning, but it is way too heavy for me to carry around. It's not a lens that I keep in my bag. It is, if I'm going to do portraits, I grab that lens because there is not a better lens, in my opinion, for that. And in that case, with that lens, if that's what I'm going to shoot, yes, I'm going to grab that lens and put it in my bag and take it with me to the shoot. And I'm going to use that lens and suffer, quote unquote, through the weight of that lens because of what it will do. And I kind of feel that same way about all of my lenses. I love what the 51.2 will do. I love what the 85 will do. I love what my 70-200 2.8 will do. I love what all of those lenses do. The problem with weight, to me, is when you accumulate all of those lenses in your bag, and now your bag weighs 90 pounds.
That's how it is, or that's how I think too. Like, I'm the same way. Like, I'm willing to carry the weight and stuff like that, but when you carry a light backpack with a really light setup, it is life changing. Like, you notice such a big difference. Like, when I was at Zion's, we were doing like a 5 mile hike, and it wasn't like anything like difficult, but like my wife like picks up my backpack afterwards, and she's like, "How did you just do this? You have a 40-pound backpack, or however much it is. Like, no wonder like your back is hurting you like right now." Like, and I was like, "Oh yeah, like I guess I'm used to it," and I like tossed the thought out. But then when I do my camera with one lens or whatever, and it's a really light setup, I feel so much better. Or when I hike on the rare occasion without my camera, I'm like, "Oh wow, this like feels really good." And so,
sure.
So that's like when I'm not sure, is without like 35 to 150, is I'm really loving that lens, but man, is it stinking heavy. And if I think I switched to a lighter lens like the 28 to 75, I think I would be like, "Oh man, what was I doing?" But I truly love the quality and the zoom range and what this lens does. But is it worth the weight? I don't know.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too, because my experience is different from yours in that I don't really hike, and I don't put my backpack on and carry it with me more than the distance from my trunk to inside my store or inside the studio.
Yeah.
If I do go out shooting one day, to do like some street photography or something like that, I don't take my bag at all. I take my camera with my lens.
Yeah. Well,
whichever lens that happens to be. The last time I went out, I took the 70 to 200. I got some really cool shots with it. The next time I go out, I'm thinking I might go with crazy wide, just to have, like with the 15 to 35, just to have the absolute opposite end of that scale and see what different results I can create with that one lens. And when it comes to just carrying my camera and a lens, to me, I'm willing to carry around the heavier lens because I have amazing results, but then also a different experience with that lens,
But
because of how it will focus more quickly and
But-
give me better bokeh and those sort of things.
but this is the thing, is I just think it's like like your 50 millimeter, for example. Like, I think if you went out with your 50 millimeter 1.8, I don't think you would notice the focus difference or anything like that. And I think you would notice the weight, though. I think is the thing, and that's if you're packing up your backpack to go out to shoot for a day, and you want to have a portrait lens just in case to have it if you're going to need it for something. Putting that 50 millimeter 1.2 is a very big decision you have to make. You will think about that very hard. You're like, okay, do I want to put that? It's heavy or not? But doing that 50 millimeter 1.8, you're like, oh yeah, I'll just put it in there. Like, you're not going to think twice about it because it's so light.
That's true. If I was going to put a backpack together and then put it on my back and carry it around all day, then you're probably right. I'll probably throw the 51.8 in there and leave the 51.2 at home.
Yeah.
I'm going to take the 15 to 35 because it's the only lens that I have that's that wide. I'll probably take the 24 to 70 and the 70 to 200. If I think that there's going to be wildlife, I might throw the 100 to 500 or the 800 millimeter in there.
At that point, your backpack is so heavy, and that's how mine is. Mine is always heavy, and so that
right.
That's why.
And that's true. But to me, my preference is I will carry around a heavier bag to ensure I don't miss an opportunity with, and not be, with not being able to get the shot that I want because I don't have the right lens to get me there.
Well, this is the thing, is you've probably heard the saying too, like, the best camera isn't the camera that you have with you, or you could say with the lens, the best lens is the lens you have with you. It's the one you're willing to pull out. And so, as in, like, if you're so tired from taking off, and I guess I'm just thinking of it in a very, I go hiking a lot and stuff like that. And so if I have a super heavy backpack, which I do a lot of the time, like, I'm more tired by the time I get to where I want to get and take photos compared to if I would have just had a light backpack. It would have been easier and stuff like that. It's like when you have your phone with you, you're a lot more willing to take more pictures and stuff like that. Yes, it's crappy, and that's why you don't use your phone. But, like, the point is, like, having a lighter setup will make you actually want to use it more than having a heavy setup.
No, and that's absolutely true. If I know where I'm going, if I'm going to go on a hike and I know where I'm going, and I kind of have an idea as to what's going to be there, I'm going to take lenses with me according to what that scene is going to be. If I know it's going to be a lake scene and I'm going to want wide angle, I'm going to take my wide angle lens, and I may not take my zooms. I might take my 800 because I don't know what wildlife I might come across, and that 800 weighs like 2 pounds, and that's worth it to me. And I think that that's what it comes down to, is what is it worth to you for the difference in those lenses. And in the case of the 50 millimeter that we've been talking about today, yeah, if I'm going hiking at all, it's a very slim chance that I'm going to take the 51.2 because it's big and heavy and whatnot. But if I'm going somewhere and just taking my camera and lens, I'm probably going to take, if I'm going to choose between the 51.8 and the 51.2, I'm probably going to take the 51.2. And if weight's an issue, I take the grip off of my camera.
Yeah.
Because that's going to make as big a difference in weight as anything else. But for me, and in my experience, which is not hiking, the added weight, is not that big a factor for me.
Yeah.
In what I do, because it's just not that much. That being said, I have started to lighten my bag a little bit. I don't carry around my 100 to 500 anymore. I take it with me to my son's hockey games. I shoot with it. I love it. But it's not in my carry around all the time bag anymore, just because it's big and heavy, and the likelihood that I'm going to need it in the scenario that I'm in is pretty small, especially because most of the time I'm carrying my bag, it's to and from work.
Do you notice also though, like if you just have your camera with a big heavy lens, like you just get like tired of shooting it, like it's just like a heavy setup. So having that in your hand for, you know, an hour straight or whatever, it's just like you get kind of tired. Like I noticed that first shoot when I had my 35 to 150, I was like, oh, this is like heavy. Like this is like, it's a heavy lens. Like, and with my 24 to 70, even though it was like still a heavy lens, like I can shoot like one handed a lot easier. Or if I have like a prime or something like that, like I can shoot one handed and it's more relaxing and stuff like that. But then with that 35 to 150, it's like, it's very present. Like you're very focused on it and it's not so much like out of mind.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I certainly had that experience. I went shooting birds with Bruce Maines, who's a fairly well-known photographer here in Utah. You know, he took me to a place that is undisclosed and shall remain so at his request. And I had the Sigma 60 to 600 with me. And I shot that lens for 10 or 15 minutes. And that thing is so stinking heavy that I just got too tired that quick to using that lens, and I took it off and I put it away and I pulled out the RF 800 that weighs a third what that 60 to 600 weighs, and I used that for the remainder of the day without using any other lenses. I used that one lens, and I was able to, you know, to walk away from that shoot with, you know, several, probably 13 or 15 final images that were really nice. I was able to, you know, to photograph these little birds, you know, these little chickadees and whatnot that don't hold still like at all. And that lens was absolutely capable of doing that at a third the weight of the Sigma. And ultimately I've sold that Sigma because it is so big and heavy.
And that's the thing. And maybe that's kind of an extreme example because that Sigma's like the size and weight of a car. But that's like the thing though, is the Sigma probably overall could have done a better job just because you have the big zoom range and you're not at f11.
Right.
Or whatever.
The Sigma is absolutely, it's brighter. It is probably sharper. I'm sure it is. But the experience was affected by the weight of that lens.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what happens sometimes is it's just like your setup is so heavy that it affects the experience. Sometimes it makes it not fun even shooting it, and even if you could get better results, it makes it not worth it.
So, yeah, and that may be my. You know, I think back to the last time that I went out and did some street photography. I had my 70 to 200 on my camera. I have the, you know, the grip on it, and I got some, you know, some neat shots, and I don't really feel like I was adversely affected by.
But imagine if you would have had your 70 to 200, your old 70 to 200 on that, the f2.8, the FE version.
Oh, the EF as opposed to the RF.
Yeah, sorry, FE is Sony. The EF version, yeah, the big, you know, twice the size one or whatever. Would it have been a different experience? I think it probably would have been, even though like it was still probably like a decent weight setup though. Like that lens is still pretty small though. Like it's pretty compared to the old one. Like the old one, like it's for sure a lot. Like if you have a lens that bigger, like having your 100 to 500, like that would have been a lot more noticeable, a lot heavier and stuff like that too. If you were taking that out in the street.
Yeah, definitely. I don't doubt that it may have some effect on what you're shooting, but in the case of between the 250 millimeters, I'm not sure if it's that big a difference to me, and maybe it's because I'm used to that weight because I've kind of always and not always, but for the last 7 or 8 years, actually probably more like 9, I've had and carried around a full size pro level digital camera.
Yeah,
that definitely has some substantial weight to it, and then lenses that have substantial weight to it.
That's actually kind of what I want to get into also, is how your experience was going from that camera to your R, for example. The weight difference, how was that noticeable to you? Did you notice that it was more enjoyable shooting?
You mean shooting the R versus the 5D Mark IV?
Yeah, and I guess this doesn't quality, was the same on the cameras for the most part. But weight-wise,
Well, the R is a little bit lighter than the 5D4, but I very quickly got into the RF lenses that are heavier than the EF lenses of their counterpart. And so for me, it was kind of a straight swap weight-wise. The first month or maybe 2 months, I was using my EF glass with the adapter on the R. And so I was saving a little bit of weight. I can't look back on it and necessarily say that I noticed. I definitely enjoyed shooting that R more than the 5D Mark IV, but I think it was really had more to do with the glass.
Yeah.
And that's the big draw with Canon's R system and their RF lenses is really the RF lenses and what they're capable of. This little RF 50 1.8 that's $200 is absolutely better than the EF version of this lens that they sell for 125 or 126 bucks. It is absolutely, without a doubt, a better lens than its EF counterpart. And the RF version of the 51.2 is definitely better than the EF
that
version.
Lens needed an upgrade too, so
but it's also a little bigger and a smidge heavier.
It is.
Sure. It's the big difference between those two is the speed of focusing is so much faster on the RF, and then the RF is tack sharp, wide open, where the EF is not.
And so what I also wanted to compare is my digital setup to my 4x5 setup. If I'm going like doing landscape photos or whatever, if I want like complete creativity, technically speaking, I would use my 4x5 setup because not necessarily because it's better image quality, which if you do it right, yes, it would be, but because you can get all like your tilts and swings and like change your focus planes and stuff like that, and just you have a lot more freedom with 4x5. But the camera itself without the lens is 7 pounds, and you have to have it on a big, heavy tripod. And then you have your lenses too, which some of the lenses are actually really light. They weigh next to nothing, but then there are some heavy ones. One time I like went up a peak and it wasn't anything crazy, but it was still a few hour hike. And I carried that thing all the way up with just 2 lenses. And it was just, I did it and I was fine because I was in decent shape, but it was so heavy.
Was it on the tripod or was it in the box?
It was in my backpack. So I fit it in my normal camera backpack, the one I usually carry around.
Okay.
But it was still just so heavy. I was dying taking this up, and I ended up not getting up in time for sunrise. I was seconds from missing my shot, and I missed it. Like I still got a decent shot that I like, but if I would have been ready 5 minutes before or whatever, I would have got my shot. And if I would have had my digital camera, maybe it doesn't have the potential as my 4x5, but I would have gotten the shot though, because it would have been way lighter and I would have gotten up there in time. It would have taken way less time to set it up. And so that's like the thing is like,
sure,
you have to pick when's the right time to use what setup and whatnot. And that's kind of when I've like been discovering is my 4x5 camera is not something I'm going to be willing to hike around with. And there's people that do that, and I don't think I'm willing to do that, at least currently.
Right.
I may change my mind.
But what you can get from your 4x5 is absolutely better than what you can get from your digital.
Not absolutely. No. And that's where the thing comes in is it can be pretty close to, is like I feel like I can take stuff with my digital camera that I'm like, oh, this is like just as good as my 4x5. Technically 4x5, if you get like a nice drum scan and stuff like that, yes, you will see a big difference.
Right, but there's capabilities that your 4x5 camera has that your digital doesn't.
No, unless I'm spending a lot of time in Photoshop trying to do some of the things to mimic the look, and it won't look the same. And so that's the thing is there's things the 4x5 camera can do that the digital just it cannot do. And that's my main thing of why I like doing
So
the
yes,
4x5.
that 4x5 is more capable.
Yes.
There are things that you can do with the 4x5 that you can't do with the digital. And I feel the same way about my 85 millimeter f1.2L. Is it worth packing around all the time? No. Can it potentially create some unbelievably cool stuff that I can't create with any other lens? Absolutely. So in that case, there are absolutely times when that lens is worth taking and having value, the same as your hike with your 4x5. And it's unfortunate that you didn't get there in time and weren't set up in time to get the shot that you wanted necessarily, and so that's definitely shows the drawbacks of these these big heavy things.
And using a 4x5 camera is an extreme example of it again, kind of like
well,
60 to
sure,
600.
it's same idea. We were willing to pack those things around because of what they're potentially capable of.
But at the end of the day, it was not worth it, though.
Right.
And so that's kind of like what I mean, though, is like sometimes even though it seems like they're going to be great and stuff like that, we have to realize whether or not it's going to be worth it or not. And that's kind of the whole thing is the weight worth the extra weight worth the extra quality, because sometimes it just is not. That's why, like, I've realized with my 4x5, and maybe this is with your 85 or something too, I'll take it out, but just when I'm doing scenes that are no more than a quarter mile from my vehicle. Other than that, I will not take out my 4x5 for the most part, and I'll just use my digital instead. Not in that same context, but maybe that's similar with your 85s or whatever.
Well, and that's very similar to my backpack. If it's more than a quarter mile, I'm probably not going to hike it at all anyway. And so, if I'm inside that quarter mile, which I always am, because beyond the quarter mile, if I can't drive it, I'm probably not going to do it. And that's to my own detriment, because I'm old and out of shape and all of the excuses that I can possibly muster. Mostly
broken hip.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
At the moment, to be straight honest, my biggest complaint is how cold it is, and I just have a really hard time dealing with the cold. But I'm also 40 pounds lighter than bad air, yeah. But I'm 40 pounds lighter than I was last winter, so I'm short a layer as it is. So there's definitely a difference for me. But I really think that that's what it comes down to, is that our different experiences and the different things that we do are going to make a difference as to whether the better gear is worth it. And I think it comes down to personal preference. And this example that we did in this scenario, this still life shoot that I did, is in reality the 51.2 better than the 51.8? Nope, it really isn't. And I'm willing to admit that $2,300 later. Well, $1,150 later. But for me, if I'm out shooting and it's the only lens that I have,
don't let your wife listen to this
familiar with it
of the podcast.
She doesn't listen anyway. She doesn't listen to what I say.
She doesn't support it. Neither does
certainly not when it comes with cameras. But this scenario is different from other scenarios. And to me, if I'm walking around doing street photography, to me, I would rather have the 51.2 and what it's capable of doing, because of the potential. And it may be an extreme case, but the potential of getting the shot versus not getting the shot.
But that's the thing with the 1.8 though, is I think like you still could get almost the same shot.
Right.
With it, if not the same shot. And that's like my thing is like, I think it's just, especially with that example of the 1.2 versus the 1.8, I think like the lines between the differences are like very slim. If it was, your 51.8 versus your 24 to 70, that's a different story, I think.
Oh yeah, well, and that's that's definitely different.
And that's how like I would always take my Sony with my 55 millimeter 1.8, which is tiny, weighs nothing, which was so nice just having that set up. But then I would notice like being like, oh, I wish I was wider, I wish I was more zoomed in or whatever, and that's when I ended up getting my 24-70 because I felt like I was very limited, and then I ended up using that a lot more. But it was heavier, but it did, like what you said, I was able to get more shots though because of it.
Yeah, definitely.
But it was not. It made it less fun to shoot though. That's for sure though. I did notice that as like
shooting with the zoom,
just because it was heavier. It was 3 times the weight or whatever, so it was just more cumbersome.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, I do remember when I first bought the 70-200 2.8L. It was the version 2. I paid like $2,500 for it, and that was the first L series lens that I had ever used. The lenses that I had before that were that really crappy 50-1.8 made entirely of plastic, and the kit lenses that came on the Rebel cameras, and the difference between that 18-135 and the 70-200, and it's the difference in how fast and bright and how quick it focused, and the sharpness that I got from that so far outweighed the extra weight compared to the 18-35 kit lens that I bought with my camera, that to me it was a no-brainer and absolutely worth carrying around that extra weight. But there's a big difference between the kit lenses and this was 10 years ago, the difference between the kit lenses that are basically garbage and that 70-200L, which is kind of Canon's flagship lens. It's like the sharpest zoom lens ever for a long time. It was the deal. It was absolutely the beast when it came to sharpness and color and chromatic aberration and all those sort of things. Canon really had it nailed down on that lens, and it was such a huge disparity between those two lenses. That's kind of what sealed me on using L series lenses when I could afford to get them or rent them or whatever, because of that huge disparity between the two. 10 years later, the difference between the RF 50-1.8 and the RF 50-1.2L is very small. It's a very small difference. And in the scenario of today, which was my little still life shoot on my dining table, there's no good reason at all to shoot with.
And that's what I mean. Like, I think that gap for sure is becoming smaller. The difference between these cheaper, smaller lenses and the bigger, heavier.
Definitely.
Last thing I kind of wanted to talk about gear-wise, weight versus quality, tripods. Because that's one thing, is I will always bring like my lightest, smallest tripod, and I think you've done the same, and sometimes we just want to throw it away right then and there.
Right into the creek.
Because, yes, it's because they just can't hold their cameras very well. They just seem unstable, and like, we even have like decent, nice ones, and I'm sure there's, some of the really nice ones that will hold it better. But that is one thing, is like, yes, you can get a really lightweight tripod and stuff like that, but like sometimes they just don't hold your camera well. If you have a full-size camera,
that's true.
A full-size mirrorless camera or whatever with a 24-70, maybe that's the thing, is if you want to go really lightweight, you need to have one of the smaller cameras like the EOS RP or the A7C and a smaller lens, and then they can hold it. But
sure, yeah, and if you're hiking a long distance, which I don't do, then and you're using a lighter camera and a lighter lens, then a lighter tripod makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but even the heads, like, they're supposed to be able to hold a full body and things like that, and
and that's rarely the case. I'll tell you this: my latest experience has been with this travel tripod that I have. It's a carbon fiber tripod. It's very light. It folds up very compact. The head on it, despite being very small, is very good. It holds my R5 with the grip and the 51.2.
Which brand is this?
This is the ProMaster.
Okay.
The problem that I've been having lately is the legs sticking. I loosen it's a like a crank tight, not a lever, and I loosen it, and I cannot get that stupid leg to move in and out. And I've taken it apart and I've cleaned it, and I've watched the YouTube videos on how to do it and make it look nice and work better and all of this, and there's one section of one leg that I just want to break it in half and chuck it over the wall onto the freeway. I just
yeah, and again, I'm sure you can spend some decent money and get nicer ones. Like you pay for what you get. Like a lot of people love the Peak Design ones, and those are still double the weight. Even the carbon fiber is still double the weight than like my really lightest weight tripod, but it's a lot more durable. Just holding it.
Well, and I'm not 100% sold on that necessarily. That Peak Design tripod of which we speak folds up very, very small, but weight wise, it is almost exactly the same, like down to the ounce, as the ProMaster tripods. And the aluminum Peak Design one weighs the same as the ProMaster aluminum one. The carbon fiber one weighs the same as the carbon fiber one. And I really like the head design on the Peak Design, but the levers to extend the legs, to me, feel like they're made of the cheapest plastic you could ever find. They feel super cheap to me and like I'm going to break it. And if there was a guarantee, like the ProMaster comes with a 1-year warranty, unconditional warranty on that stuff, where the Peak Design doesn't. If I break the lever on there, it's because I broke it. But the ProMaster one is $260. The Peak Design one is $600 for the carbon fiber. And to me, it's just egregiously expensive.
Yeah,
where the benefit is that it folds up really small at the expense of the locking levers that feel like they're going to break.
But to be fair, I have not heard of any problems with the Peak Design ones, and I've heard of problems with the ProMasters. I've experienced problems with them, and I've heard other people have them break and stuff like that, and I haven't heard that with the Peak Design stuff. I've seen
that's fair.
More people shoot the ProMasters, but like I haven't heard of any problems with the Peak Designs now.
I sell both of them, but I sell probably 15 or 20 of the ProMaster ones to every Peak Design one that I sell. And the biggest reason that the customer tells me is the difference in price.
Yeah, and that's
and then obvious. as far as having them come back, as far as like a warranty issue, I have had one of the ProMaster tripods come back with a problem. And I can see that it was a manufacturing problem that got missed. Yeah, there was an error on the leg, and it fell apart, and it was inside the ear. And he brought it in, and we handed him a new one, and that's the ProMaster's guarantee on those, which is great. Aside from that, for as many of the ProMaster ones that I've sold, I don't get them back as far as warranty concerns go. But at the same time, I personally have a problem with one of the legs on mine, but I've had it for 4 or 5 years.
But that's just what I mean, though, is I think spending the extra money on tripods ends up being worth it if you use them a lot. And that's like how I am. I use them a ton.
I agree. I absolutely agree.
And so I think it's better just to spend the extra money and get nicer ones, because you've seen my bigger field optics one. Mm-hmm. That's not the giant one, the one that's slightly smaller.
Yes.
But that one feels like super great quality. I have a ProMaster head on it, the big one, and that ProMaster head I also really like. It feels like really great quality and stuff like that. And I'll use that together, even though it is heavier. It's not crazy heavy because it is like carbon fiber. The head is insanely heavy, that ProMaster one.
It is.
But it feels super good quality, and I can have my 4x5 camera on that. I can have my digital camera on that, and I feel confident, and I really enjoy using it just because it doesn't feel like it's breaking under me, and it feels like something that I can have, for many years, and it will continue to be great. And these ProMaster ones, or not even the ProMasters, the smaller field optics ones I have, they're good tripods. They're similar to the ProMaster, but they just don't feel like I'm going to be able to have them forever. It's already after using them for a while, they don't feel brand new. They feel like they are starting to have problems more or less.
Sure. And and maybe at some point I'll break down and buy one of the Peak Design ones and try it out and see how it is longevity wise, and how much I use it and how I feel about the lever locks on the legs, and and we'll just have to see. I have to see and try it out. My biggest problem with the Peak Design one is it's just so expensive. I don't think that the difference in price on the Peak Design tripod is worth the extra money for the better quality that you're probably getting over the ProMaster.
With the Peak Design ones, I am not sure. But they have like some of the Gitzo ones, the really right stuff ones, and those are $600-700 or plus tripods. Sometimes they're $1,200 tripods.
I have the $1,200 one.
Yes, exactly. And those ones will last you your entire life, is the thing. And at that point, I do think it is worth it. Like it's crazy expensive, but I do think it's worth it. I have some Gitzo tripods from my grandpa that was a photographer. How long has he's been dead for 30 years now, and so he was a photographer over 30 years ago, and who knows when he bought the tripods, and they're still good tripods. Like they're heavy because that's how all of them were back then, but the hinges, all like everything on them still work great, and that's the thing though, is every tripod when you buy it, when it's brand new, it feels great, but does it stay like that?
Right. And it's the same, but that's the same thing. Like that big, heavy, really right stuff tripod that I have isn't crazy super heavy, and the reason that I bought it is because it's amazing quality, but also because it stands 72 inches tall at the shoulder, and I can put a head on it. I can put a gimbal head on it and put my camera on that, and I can look up into my camera at the moon without having to squat down.
Yeah.
That's the reason that I bought it. Am I going to hike with it? Nope. It's too big and heavy, just like my bag full of L series lenses. And to me, it's not worth, in that case, carrying around that extra weight, where that little ProMaster one that I have, am I frustrated with the leg on it? Yes. Am I going to seek solutions to get it fixed or potentially buy a replacement for it? Probably. But I don't hike, so I don't use it a ton either. I use it around the house, and like for the still life shoot that I did, I used it. But I am willing to deal with that problem with that leg, at least in the short term, because it is lighter and easier to carry around, which is, kind of the same thing as, with the lenses. If we're talking about a bag full of lenses, I would rather have the lightweight options with me to carry around, where if it's one lens, I would rather have the better lens, because the difference in weight between this lens and this lens isn't that big a deal to me necessarily, especially when it comes to the 50 millimeters.
Yeah.
The 50 millimeter versions, as opposed to the Sigma 60 to 600 versus the
RF
800.
It comes down to the same thing too, though, is the nicer, sturdier tripod can do things that the lightweight one can't. Just like how you were explaining, your 85 millimeter 1.2 can do things that no other lens can. And so it comes down to the same thing.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I agree with that what it comes down to is personal preference and what we're willing to carry around, in the difference that it's going to make for what we're doing. If I'm going to go to a waterfall and do long exposure stuff, am I going to take that ProMaster tripod again? Probably not. I'm going to take the bigger, heavier, really right stuff tripod, because when I set that thing down on the ground and lock everything into place, it's going to stay there. It's not going to move. And even if I'm standing in the creek with water bouncing across it, I'm not worried about it moving. I can still get a good, solid, long exposure shot with that tripod, because it can do what I need it to do where the other one can't. And, and in some cases, the L series lenses will do what I want them to do that the STM lenses can't.
Okay, well, I think that's where we should leave it. I think that was all.
Sounds good.
All went well.
We should maybe shake hands and remind each other that we're good friends.
No, I think we all had very valid points, and curious to hear what other people think. One last thing I did want to state is, just because you're going for the lighter weight thing, I am not saying going for a crappy lens or whatever. I'm still saying you can get some light, like Andy's version, he has his 50 millimeter 1.2 and his 1.8. The 1.2 is clearly better, but the 1.8 is still a really good sharp lens. But there's cases where that's not so true. There's cases where the 50 millimeter 1.8, or the cheaper, lighter version is a garbage lens. So I'm not.
That's absolutely true.
That's not what we're talking about. We're just saying sometimes you can still get really good items, lenses, or tripods or whatever, that are a lot cheaper and lighter weight. That's not always true. The case. So you need to be careful with what you're buying. And that's what we're saying, is sometimes the gap right now is becoming smaller and smaller with, certain lenses like the STM ones and the L series ones. And Sony has similar ones like that too that are becoming smaller and smaller. And so you just kind of have to, look at YouTube reviews and see if it actually is a good lens that holds up, and then decide what is the most important thing for you.
Definitely. When it comes down to, to it, pardon the pun, but you kind of have to weigh your options as far as what the value is. Like Oliver was saying, 6 or 7 years ago, the difference between Canon's 51.8 and 51.2 was a world of difference.
Yes.
And I kind of want to get my hands on one and do the same thing to compare those two, to see the huge disparity in difference between the $125 and the $1,350 lens. Because it's one stop and 10 times the money, but
this one was for sure 10 times better though.
Definitely.
Yeah, which now that's not the case.
Right.
But
and and then what it comes down to is that it's our personal preference, and Oliver and I will go out and shoot, and I'll bring my heavy lens and he'll bring his light one, and we'll both go out and get great shots because we're good photographers.
All my lenses are heavy now, so except for my couple of primes, so it's all heavy. I wish I had lighter stuff, but it's just okay.
Sure.
Well, we're gonna end it right there. We've talked a lot. We've chewed your ears off.
We've gone over.
Yeah. Okay. Have a good evening. Go out and take some pictures.